Well, hello and welcome to Sunday Morning Coffee with Dr. Childress. So, in today's coffee session, I'm going to be discussing the psychological experience of the child. I typically avoid this because until we can first protect the child's in a dangerous situation. And so it is up to the professionals to get in and properly and accurately diagnose the pathologies so that we can protect the child and then recover the child's normal range and healthy authenticity. But until we get the mental health people um, to step up to their obligations and protect the child, and in most cases, many cases, they are actually participating in the creation of the child's psychological pathology, attachment pathology, then we can't put the burden on the child to solve the situation. The mental health people need to step up big time on this. But to discuss the child's experience, I first want to talk about the context surrounding the child and how did the induction of a false reality take place? Why did the child collapse into this lies and false reality rather than stay in contact with the authentic parent and the authentic experience with that parent? And so once I get to um, the context and explain the context for the child, then I hopefully will get into more of the child's psychological experience, which is a misattribution of feelings. They have certain authentic feelings, but they're getting kind of messed up in how they interpret what those mean. So, first off, this is my final slide. So, there we go. Okay. So, to begin with, we cannot ask the child to reveal their authenticity until we can first protect the child from the psychological retaliation of the pathological parent. And that's what I was saying right up front. And this is important to understand for parents. A lot of time, parents are coming to me saying, "How can I recover my child? What can I do?" Blah blah blah. And I'm in a position where if I tell you what you can do, we're actually going to be motivating the child to restore healthy attachment bonds to the targeted parent. But then the pathological parent is going to increase their psychological pressure on the child to remain pathological. Just as we are getting the child to bond, the child will be getting increased pressure to be pathological, and we're just going to rip the child apart. So that's why we need that protective separation period to allow the mental health people to recover the attachment bond. And then we reintroduce the pathological parent into that and keep the child stable. But if we try to recover the child at the same point and allow the pathological parent to continue their manipulation of the child during that process, we're just going to rip the child apart. The second thing I want to point out to parents that's important to understand as we enter the psychological experience of the child is that it's not up to the parents to fix the pathology. That's the nature of the pathology. The targeted parent is being invalidated as a parent, and the pathological parent is giving the child false interpretations of reality. But the healthy parent can't challenge those because they're being invalidated by the whole nature of the manipulative pathology. It requires the mental health people. That's whose job it is to assess, diagnose, and treat pathology and the child's attachment pathology. It's a shared persecutory delusion. It's a factitious attachment pathology, factitious disorder imposed on another. It's up to the mental and child psychological abuse. It's up to the mental health professionals to get in and diagnose the pathology. And I don't want to forget, it's also spousal abuse using the child as a weapon. It's one of the most brutal forms of spousal abuse there is, basically killing the other parent's child psychologically, symbolically, in retaliation for the divorce. That's brutal. That parent used to have a child before the divorce. Now they don't have a child after the divorce. That is a brutal and savage form of spousal abuse. So it's up to the mental health people to step up and do this. Unfortunately, they're not. Unfortunately, the mental health system in the family courts is at absolutely rock bottom. And so the parents are having to cope with situations that they shouldn't have to be coping with. So, as I'm talking about how we recover the child or what we do with relative to the child, I just want to point out that we're compensating for the professional malpractice in forensic psychology. The and to point this out, the patient should never have to explain the pathology to the doctor, but you guys do. And so that just indicates just how low the professional standards of practice are in the family courts. They're just non-existent to where patients are having to explain the pathology to the doctor. And even the doctor, Dr. Childress, you'll hear me explaining things about applied behavioral analysis, behavioral psychology in the 60s, or family systems therapy from from the 1970s. And I'm still explaining that to the mental health people. Today, I'm going to touch on the field of intersubjectivity. That's Tronick, Stern, others in that field. That's where we kind of should be, upper brain development and all sorts of stuff, regulatory networks within the child and stuff. But we are so far away from actual application of knowledge that it's stunning to me. Um, so let's start by talking about the context of the child and what's going on. The issue is the psychological control of the child, the manipulative psychological control of the child by a pathological parent. Now, everybody out there uses this word parental alienation. Stop it, stop it, stop it. There's no such thing as parental alienation, and it just gets us fighting all the time. Switch over. It's easy peasy. Just switch over to using the construct of psychological control. The child is being psychologically controlled by a pathological parent. Now, as soon as you do that, you get all the research support. And Barber lists it back in 20 years ago. We knew about psychological control of the child. Look who's it's published by, the American Psychological Association. So, intrusive parenting, how psychological control affects children and adolescents. 20 years we got research on this. And so, the moment we return to the application of established knowledge to the pathology, we get all sorts of research and all sorts of information that becomes applicable. And I'll be going through some of that today. But you parents and being misled by professionals over into using parental alienation as a construct, stop it. The moment you, as parents, start to apply the established knowledge, that forces the mental health people to apply the established knowledge. Holy cow, you're explaining family systems to them. You're explaining psychological control to the doctors. It just goes to highlight the inadequacy, the failure of the mental health system, but it also puts you on solid ground where you're not fighting about made up stuff and getting attacked. There's no such thing, and everything gets off track when we start making stuff up. So that's the first recommendation, and we'll talk about what psychological control is here. So here's the definition of psychological control from Barber and Harmon. Let's pull that up. So psychological control refers to parental behaviors that are intrusive and manipulative of of children's thoughts, feelings, and attachment to parents. I mean, we got right in the front quote. We got that this is messing with the child's attachment. These behaviors appear to be associated with disturbances in the psycho-emotional boundaries between the child and the parent. So those psychological it's a boundary violation. It's like psychological incest. Incest is a physical boundary violation. This is a psychological boundary violation, and that's a psychological abuse. It destroys the child from the inside out, and hence the development of an independent sense of self and identity. the two people become fused into a single psychological state, single emotional states, belief system, everything. And that's what the psychological control does. It overwhelms the child's sense of identity and creates a false or shared identity. And when that shared identity is or the pathological parent has a persecutory delusion, that identity then shares the persecutory delusion. So here's how it happens. Okay, so it doesn't happen through coaching. When I hear that term, the coaching or something, that's just ignorance, absolute ignorance. This is what 2010. So 10 years ago, this is the state of this our understanding of the issue. Psychological control can be expressed through a variety of parental tactics, including guilt induction, which refers to using guilt inducing strategies to pressure children to comply with a parental request. That's used a lot, especially the borderline variant. The borderline parent goes victim and creates this nurturing out of the child, where if the child bonds to the uh, targeted parent, then they feel guilty for betraying their alliance to the pathological parent. So guilt induction in that cross generational coalition, contingent love and the withdrawal of love. That's true for both of them. Narcissists are really good at this. They give you all sorts of love and stuff if you, and then they can get really nasty and cold and mean if you don't do what they want. So the child quickly learns that this is going to get me parental love, and this is going to get me like a bad, um, uncomfortable parent. Instilling anxiety, which refers to the induction of anxiety to make children comply with parental requests. That is absolutely true. They create this false belief in the child that the other parent represents a danger to the child. So we get all these anxiety displays, and the attachment system is a predator driven system. That's how it evolved. And so the baby zebra is keeping an eye on mommy zebra. And if mommy zebra gets anxious because she sees a predator, that child goes, woo, and there's a predator out there and gets close to mommy zebra. So the attachment system is a predator driven system that is exquisitely sensitive to parental displays of anxiety. And that's what's happening. The pathological parent displays anxiety about the child being with the other parent, which signals to the child that parent is no longer a protective parent, the targeted parent, but has become a predator. And so that messes with the child's attachment, as we noted earlier. And then also invalidations of the child's perspective, which pertains to parental constraining of the child's spontaneous expressions of thoughts and feelings. Yeah. So if the child comes over, a pathological parent says, "How was your time with the other parent?" The child says, "Oh, great, it was fine." That parent goes into that withdrawal of love and how you doing? But if the child says, "Oh, it was awful. I was bored," the parent lights up and says, "Oh my goodness. Oh, you poor thing," and gives nurture to the child. "I can't believe they didn't have things planned for you," and acts as if the child is being victimized. And so the child's authentic positive experiences with the other parent, the targeted parent, are invalidated and are replaced by the child expressing criticisms of the targeted parent, which can then allow the pathological parent to play the role of the protective parent. It's all a kabuki theater of victimized child, protective parent, abusive parent. And all the pathological parent has to do is get the child to become or enter the role of the victimized child, and that automatically defines there has to be an abusive parent, so that the targeted parent must be abusing the child if we have a victimized child, and then a live parent can come in as a protective parent. And so it's just getting the child to believe they're being victimized, and it's a manipulative way. There's 1,000 ways that they can do that. One of the primary ways, and this is Stone, Bueller, and Barber, who describe pretty much what's going on in the family courts and link the psychological control over to the family systems dynamics. So the concept of triangles describes the way any three people relate to each other and involve others in emotional issues between them. Notice the person, Bowen. So that's a major family systems therapist. And there's another quote of where if you go to the Bowen Center for Study of the Family, Google it and go there and look up the 8 constructs. And one of them is triangles. And there'll be a nice little quote about how families always collapse into triangles. A two-person conflict isn't stable. A three-person conflict is. And so family conflict collapses into three-person triangles. Now, well, so Bowen, in the anxiety related or the anxiety filled environment of conflict, a third person, the child, is triangulated. It could be grandparent, others. A third person is triangulated either temporarily or permanently to ease the anxious feelings of the conflicting partners. By default, that third person is exposed to an anxiety provoking and disturbing atmosphere. That's the child. And for example, a child might become the scapegoat, that's the identified patient, or the focus of attention. That's what we have here. The child becomes the focus of attention, supposedly victimized, protected parent sort of stuff, thereby transferring the tension from the marital dyad to the parent child dyad, which is exactly what we have here. Um, and they go on to say that the unresolved tension in the marital relationship might spill over to the parent child relationship through the parent's use of psychological control as a way of securing and maintaining a strong emotional alliance and level of support from the child. Exactly what's going on here. So that the idea that these mental health people, these forensic psychologists and reunification therapists and child therapists and everything, don't know this and aren't assessing for this and aren't incorporating this into their diagnosis and treatment plan, the issues around psychological control, is phenomenally incompetent. Okay, they are practicing, and I would question, where are the licensing boards? Why are you having to explain this and give these quotes to the doctors to explain what where are the licensing boards who are supposed to be getting you competent mental health services? Nowhere to be seen. And that's the critical issue. That's what has allowed everything to go to the bottom. Their licensing boards are active in ADHD and autism and everything else. They do not require competence in the family courts. And you have to understand why. Um, the let's go back for a second. Um, way of securing in the child. As a consequence, the triangulated youth might feel pressured or obliged to listen to or agree with one parent's complaints against the other. There you go. It's describing what's exactly going on in the family courts. The resulting enmeshment, that's the psychological control, the boundary violation. The resulting enmeshment and cross generational coalition would exemplify parents' use of psychological control to coerce and maintain a parent youth emotional alliance against the other parent. They cite to Haley, they cite to Mnuchin, two prominent family systems therapists. And another quote from Haley that gives the definition for a cross generational coalition. This is a structural diagram from Salvador Mnuchin, who that shows the pathology in the family courts. That's a father and a son in the meshed cross generational coalition against the mother, and it's resulting in an emotional cutoff. And the inverted hierarchy is that the son is up on the parental level and the mother is down at the child level. So that allows the child to judge the parent as if the parent was the child and the child was the parent. So there's your emotional mesh cross generational coalition. Father and mother got a divorce. The emotional cutoff is between the son and the mother. And then the inverted hierarchy is that the child has now flipped up above and so is judging down at the parent as if the parent were the child and the child were the parent. So again, this is family systems therapy from the 1970s and 80s, that these mental health people around you are assessing, diagnosing, and treating families and not applying family systems therapy and family systems construct is malpractice, in my opinion. It's practice beyond the boundaries of your competence if you're not applying knowledge to what you're doing and you're just making stuff up. Where are the licensing boards? So let's talk about the other parent for a second, because that's also an important part of this to understand. This is not normal range we're talking about. These are significantly pathological parents, and that's what kicks it into the child abuse range. Is they're a problem, and they're narcissistic and borderline, and that's your classic difference between the two. They're basically variants of the same type of pathology. The narcissist has stopped trying to achieve love. They've sacrificed love to achieve safety. The borderline approach pathology is still trying to get love, but sacrifices safety to get love. And so it's different styles of dealing with the same problem. But then we add a new layer onto that out of the research. Those are diagnostic pathology, narcissistic and borderline. Research has identified a third or a group of personalities, um, a constellation of personality characteristics called the dark personalities. And Melanie Greenham has written some wonderful articles about that and with me. They're up on ResearchGate. You can Google them. On the dark personalities and their collapse into persecutory delusions in the family courts. So here's the definition of the dark personality parent that we're working with here. So, first cited by Paulhus and Williams, the dark triad, that's the core first pathology identified. The dark triad refers to a set of three distinct but related antisocial personality traits: Machiavellianism, extremely manipulative; narcissism; and psychopathy. Oh my goodness. They're narcissistic, they're psychopathic, and extremely manipulative. And they are in the family courts. They are unidentified, undiagnosed, and untreated. And they are just wreaking havoc on the other parent and the child. And nobody is stopping these severely pathological parents. But we don't need to diagnose the parent's personality pathology. What we need to understand is what the personality pathology is. And then, as the consequences of that come in, the child's all distorted. We know where it comes from. We can recognize the child's symptoms of the pathology, and we don't have to chase the parent's pathology down the rabbit hole. We identify it by the child's symptoms, and then we have the context knowledge of knowing what produces that particular set of child symptoms. So each of the dark triad traits is associated with feelings of superiority and privilege. And you'll see these reflected in the child. The child reflects attitude of superiority over the other parent and privilege, this sense of entitlement relative to the targeted parent. They're acquiring these personality characteristics from the psychological control, enmeshment, psychological fusion with a pathological parent. So this coupled with a lack of remorse and empathy. The absence of empathy is a capacity for cruelty. So when I'm assessing a child for the absence of empathy, I'm looking not for their feelings for the other person. I'm looking for their capacity for cruelty. Do they have empathy, or are they, the other person deserves the cruelty? So coupled with a lack of remorse and empathy, often leads individuals high in these socially malevolent traits to exploit others for their own personal gain. In this case, exploiting the child for secondary gain, of exploiting the child's induced symptoms for secondary gain to the parent, of manipulating the court's decisions around child custody, and to meet the parent's own psychological needs. That's a false disorder, a factitious disorder imposed on another, imposed on the child. The factitious disorder is a false attachment pathology and the shared persecutory delusion. And so that's the diagnosis of the pathology. And both of those, either of those, are child psychological abuse diagnosis. So there's three dark personalities identified in the research literature, and they're basically narcissistic, borderline, and then add sadism. So the dark triad is narcissism, psychopathic, and Machiavellian levels of manipulation. That's your narcissistic variant. The borderline variant is vulnerable dark triad. That's vulnerable narcissism, borderline personality traits, and Machiavellian levels of manipulation. And if we add sadism to the dark triad, we get the dark tetrad. And holy cow, narcissistic, psychopathic, extremely manipulative, and sadistic. That's evil. And that's what Book and the colleagues have two articles on the dark triad and the dark tetrad, where they identify this constellation of personality characteristics as the core of evil. And I was pretty surprised when I saw first encountered in the research literature that they're thinking they've found where evil is in this constellation of pathology. And that's in the family courts. We have this. So we got sadistic parents in the family courts that are using the child's induced symptoms as a weapon against the other spouse. And the mental health people aren't stopping it. The courts aren't stopping it. In fact, the courts and the mental health people are doing it. They're participating in the psychological abuse of the child and the psychological abuse of the other spouse. So that's the personality pathology we have in the family courts, and that's the family systems. This child is being psychologically controlled by an extremely malevolent parent, and that's why we can't. Don't want to. I'm reluctant to asking the child to bond to the targeted parent, knowing that that's what I have to send them home to. So what we need to do is identify the severity of the child's attachment pathology as being only caused by this dark personality parent and that type of pathology, that it's not an authentic child abuse situation. We're dealing with a two-person attribution of causality. We do a differential diagnosis. We diagnose the pathology as being caused by the pathogenic parenting of the allied parent. And there's ways to do that once we understand what the pathology is and go about doing that. And then we protect the child, and we give the child, for psychological abuse, I'd recommend about like 3 months to give therapy the chance then to bond the child back and recreate, recover the child's healthy normal range attachment bonding to the normal range targeted parent, stabilize the kid's return to reality out of the delusional disorder. And then we reintroduce the abusive parent with enough safeguards in place to make sure the abuse doesn't resume. And the safeguards would be an outcome measure. And so we would help the child learn coping strategies for coping with a more difficult parent, the pathological parent, but we would also take away the rewards that pathological parent is getting for producing pathology in the child. So we take away the reinforcers that are serving to keep that motivation in place. It's not working anymore. We stop the manipulation. The moment it's not working anymore, then that pathological parent has no motivation to create the pathology in the child, and the child's free. So that's, we need a protective separation, but it goes based on diagnosis. Is there child psychological abuse? Then that diagnosis guides treatment. Now, as we shift into the psychological state of the child through all of this, how did this child collapse? The actual process of that is in a brain system called intersubjectivity. There's two relationship systems, the attachment system and the second one, intersubjectivity. They're both primary motivational systems of the brain. So I refer to intersubjectivity as psychological connection. It's what we feel when we go into the movie theaters and we psychologically connect to the actors. And then we feel as if we were the actors. We feel what they're going through, their motivations and feelings, as if we were them. And that's that connection system, to feel what other people experience. And that works really closely with the attachment system, the two of them, but they are actually separate systems. One's for emotional bonding, the other's for predators, the other is for psychological connection, for language, for a number of other relationship features. Downloading emotional regulatory networks is through the intersubjective system. And some of the main people, Stern, I think, is the main person over here. Tronick is right there with him. Stern and Tronick were one and two. Then others like Fonagy and his ideas of mentalization, particularly around the borderline personality, that how the parent mentalizes the child's experience. That's Fonagy's sort of term for intersubjectivity. Tronick calls it a dyadic state of consciousness. And then Dan Siegel, in his books, has popularized or presented to the general public the research around intersubjectivity. Casalino as well has been working with this and describing this to the general public. So what is intersubjectivity? Daniel Stern describes it in his monumental book. The present moments that interest us most. Let's pull that up a little larger. The present moments that interest us the most are those that arise when two people make a special kind of mental contact, namely an intersubjective contact. This involves a mutual interpenetration of minds that permits us to say, I know that you know that I know, or I feel that you feel that I feel. And so it's a shared psychological state. And so when the family systems folks talk about enmeshment or the boundary violation stuff, that's what it's talking about. But this enmeshed state gets over this mutual interpenetration of minds. Now, what should be happening developmentally is that there will be these empathic failures that could create breaches that are then repaired. And then there's another breach and another repair and another. And that's the breach and repair that establishes boundaries within intimacy. So we have both intimacy and separate boundaries. That's a breach and repair sequence that Tronick talks about. And that's why it's critical. What we have in the family courts is a breach with no repair. That's the worst possible outcome. Tronick calls it the ugly, the good, the bad, and the ugly. The worst thing we can possibly do is leave a breached attachment bond unrepaired, because it's that breach and repair sequence is doing all sorts of stuff about downloading regulatory systems and downloading, just the child's understanding and capacity to repair relationships when they go south. But this child doesn't have that capacity because they're missing the breach and repair sequence. So, this involves a mutual penetration of minds. And it's along the mirror neurons, is if you want to go a little bit further into it. So Stern also says in his description, in understanding this is a neurological brain system. Our nervous systems are constructed to be captured by the nervous system of others. Our intentions are modified or born in a shifting dialogue with the felt intentions of others. So that's what's happening. We got the narcissist and borderline and their felt experience, and the intentions and feelings and psychological state and thoughts of the child are being born in this shifting dialogue with the pathological parents' feelings and motivations. Our feelings are shaped by the intentions, thoughts, and feelings of others. And our thoughts are co-created in dialogue, even when it's only with ourselves. In short, our mental life is co-created. This continuous co-creative dialogue with other minds is what I'm calling the intersubjective matrix. Now, when I hear people, out in the court system, ignorant people say, well, is the child being influenced? Of course the child is being influenced. I mean, holy cow, that's how we work as humans. Is it it is almost impossibly rare, I would imagine impossible, for a Christian family to raise a child who says at 10 years old says, "I'm gonna be a Muslim," and the two parents are Christian. And no, the children adopt the belief systems of the culture and the parents and everybody that surrounds them. So Christian families raise Christian children, and at least until adulthood. You don't see 12-year-olds deciding their religious faith or their political stuff or anything, because their brains aren't working yet, and they're socially referencing their parents. That's what it's called, socially referencing for meaning. And so the idea that we have independent children making decisions, no. The question becomes, what influence is the parent applying, not whether or not. It's what that influence is. And so the ignorance and incompetence in the mental health people is substantial, phenomenal. It's malpractice. Where are the licensing boards? And we need to get you some competent mental health people. And so I'm talking to the mental health people. I'm teaching you about applied behavioral analysis or family systems therapy, those sorts of family systems constructs, or diagnostic stuff about delusional thought disorder. I'm educating you so you can educate your mental health professionals, but I'm educating you about stuff in the 60s and 70s and 80s, attachment stuff. I'm not up to even the 2000s yet on intersubjectivity and where we've gone in the last 20 years with mirror neurons and all that stuff, which is where the mental health people should be. The doctors should be up here. But I'm having to educate the doctors about stuff from ages ago. So that's the context surrounding the child. That we have the manipulative psychological control of the child by an extremely malevolent parent. And if we try to restore the child's healthy development, that's just going to rip the child apart, as the manipulations of the pathological parent is going to ratchet up, and the child's going to be caught in the middle of stuff. So we need an accurate diagnosis to guide our treatment plan. Who's abusing the child? I know one parent or the other is abusing the child whenever I have severe attachment pathology. Is it a two-person attribution of causality to the targeted parent? That's something the targeted parent's abusive and creating that attachment breach. Or is it a three-person triangle attribution of causality, where the child and parent have formed a cross-generational coalition against the other parent, by creating a shared persecutory delusion and factitious attachment pathology through all the manipulative tactics of psychological control. So this is child abuse one way or the other. We need a proper risk assessment on all of these cases. And historically, we have had a proper risk assessment on none of them. So the forensic psychology is a failed experiment in service delivery to a vulnerable population. Somebody's going to have to explain to me why all the forensic psychologists across the country shouldn't lose their licenses for violations to 2.01, 2.04 of the APA Ethics Code on competence. Failure in their duty to protect is the one I think they should lose their license on, because if you believe a shared delusion, you become part of the shared delusion. You become part of the pathology. So all the mental health people who believe the shared delusion become part of the pathology. They become part of the child abuse. They are inducing the false belief in being victimized because the child is getting communication from the therapists and the court, but from the therapist, that the child's belief system, that the targeted parent is malevolently treating a false attachment pathology and the persecutory delusion, they're getting communication from the therapist that that's a valid perception. Okay. So because they're treating it, they're going, oh my goodness, you poor thing, and they're acting as if that's true. And that one of the ways I see that is unsupervised visitation. When you put a targeted, normal range targeted parent on supervised visitation for whatever strange concerns you have, um, that communicates to the child that that parent is actually represents a danger to the child, which is the false belief, and so you're producing the pathology in the child if you believe it. And that's a critical piece for parents to understand in my recommendations for how you cope with your child's pathology. You have one parent who's all distorted, you have you who's all normal, and the child is in between, and the distorted parent can get in there and manipulate the child to get into a false belief system. What I recommend to you parents is using that intersubjectivity system and your anchoring in reality to get the child over to reality, to stabilize the child in reality, not because you're explaining reality to them. Their frontal lobes don't work. Cognitive interventions, explaining them to the pathology, won't work. The fundamental thing you have to do is not believe the lies. The pathological parent is going to try to destabilize you in every way possible. This comes off the work of Dorsey Pruder. The pathological parent is going to destabilize you in every way possible by challenging reality, false allegations, by challenging your role as a parent. Oh, you're no longer a mom or a dad. By challenging your child. Who's this child? And why are they reacting the way they are? And by destabilizing you financially, driving this into the court, shaming you publicly. Oh my gosh, your child doesn't even want to be with you, kind of stuff. And they trigger you into your anxiety, where you begin to want to prove reality to people. And you have to, because the lies, and these ignorant mental health people are believing the lies unless you prove reality to them, because they're ignorant and incompetent. So you have to educate your doctors. So you're surrounded in a very difficult situation. And that's, again, going back to the fundamental issue, is it's not up to you to solve that. It's up to the doctors to solve that, because you're being invalidated and you're in the middle of a pathology that's a pathology of lies with a narcissistic, borderline, dark personality parent. Holy cow, the mental health people should be protecting you from the spousal abuse, using the child as a weapon. That's their obligation. Oh, by the way, protecting the child from the psychological abuse and destruction of their lives, factitious disorder imposed on another, shared persecutory delusion, a thought disorder, that's destroying the child's attachment system. The mental health people should be protecting the child from child abuse, and they're not, and they haven't been for 40 years. In forensic psychology, somebody's going to have to explain to me why they shouldn't lose their license for that. But I don't want to put the onus on you, that there's something you could be doing, or that you're no, 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 no. You did nothing wrong. It's not your fault. There's bad people who are doing bad things, and we're going to make them stop. But it's not your fault. Okay? You didn't do anything wrong on this. And that's the classic um, statement, the classic statement we make to child abuse victims. You did nothing wrong, kid. It's not your fault. You didn't provoke mom to start beating you with electrical cords. It wasn't something you did. And so that's also the case in the family courts for you parents. So, given that, what can you do? Well, one of the first things is don't believe the false reality that's constructed, because the moment the child comes to you with a false reality and you respond to the false reality as if it was true, you're communicating to the child that that false reality is true. Okay, so don't do that. But that means you're going to have to stay solidly in your domain of knowledge of what truth and reality actually is, and not trigger into your anxiety. And so I refer a lot of people over to Dorsey Pruder's Higher Purpose Parenting course, because that's the only trauma-informed course, parenting course I know of. But it also helps parents deal with that triggering into anxiety and keeps you out of, and because the moment you can not trigger into that anxiety, now you have the capacity to respond to actual reality rather than to the false reality that's being created. Um, and so start, because if you go back to, let's go back to, there we go. Yeah, if you go back, the present moment, that there's this mutual interpenetration of minds, that's creating this false reality with the child. And if you believe that, then you become part of this whole delusional system. But if you are able to stay in your own reality, then the child now has two realities that are incompatible. But now, as you stay in your own reality, this is what I recommend: your background emotional tone should be one of in the happy zone. There's four emotions: angry, sad, afraid, and happy. Two are power emotions. So that's angry, which is dominance, and afraid, which is submission. Two are social emotions. That's happy, social bonding, and sad draws nurture. Happy, though, is also a dominance emotion. It comes off the attachment system, because if I'm sitting around with all of my monkey critter friends and we're eating bananas and everybody's happy, I know there's no predator threat. I know everybody's safe, and there's no danger. So the emotion of happy communicates no threat or danger. And so as the this whole situation challenges you and is seeking to provoke you into your anxiety and defensiveness, instead of responding with the angry, when the child comes over and challenges your alpha dominance and starts giving you all sorts of attitude problems or all sorts of stuff, and that's would typically trigger you into a dominant response to say, no, you're the kid, get back, inverted hierarchy, you're get back in your role as a child, you can't talk to me, that sort. But if you do that, that's just going to be manipulated because you're angry and you're too angry and you're not understanding the child enough, and all. So it's setting you up. So what I recommend you do is you bring over the happy emotion as your dominance emotion, that there's no worries, there's no threat, oh my goodness. And you don't have to make it broad. Every time you smile, you create a little happy chemical in your brain, and you can hear it in my voice, you can hear it stuff. And so it just practice it, because this is the background state you want to be in. Okay, of just a relaxed, calm, and as the child's going, whoa, you're staying okay with things. Okay, because one of the things, that's a social bonding emotion, so it's going to be drawing into that inner subjective field. Angry always separates out of the inner subjective field, out of that connection. Anxious will do that as well. That just pops the kid right out because it's too prickly. Sad will draw into the inner subjective field, but it's painful. It's painful for a child to be with a sad parent, so they pop out as well. But it's the happy emotion that is this bonding. That's where you get that connection, that mutual interpenetration of minds is on the happy background state. So even as the pathology tries to manipulate you into being angry or afraid, or even sad, um, don't let it. You just stay here. Okay. Now you can say what you want to say, but just stay from a background state of here. And then just stay anchored in your reality. No, those aren't true. I'm not treating. I love you so much. You're the best to me, and we can um, take that approach. The That should be getting support from your therapist. Okay, the family therapist should be driving that, and you can just stay in that state, and then the therapist will help move that into the resolution. But we don't have the therapist, unfortunately. Um, so staying grounded in your reality. The second feature, and I'll again cite to Dorsey on this, that she calls you the chosen parent. Everybody else calls you the targeted parent, including myself, because you're the target for spousal abuse. She refers to you as a chosen parent because she understands stuff from being the child, which is the child is giving you the problem to solve because the other parent's collapsing into their nonsense. And so the child, they're the more vulnerable parent, and they're communicating to the child their vulnerability a thousand ways. It's not to the child up here, it's to the child's kind of state, and that they need the child to come over and take care of that parent, to be a certain way for that parent to remain stable and okay. Whereas you're the healthier parent, you're going to be okay. So the child's not so much worried about you. The child's systems aren't so much worried about you. But what that does is it gives you the problem to solve. And which the problem for the child is, how do I love both parents? Because one parent is forcing me to choose sides in the spousal conflict. So the problem is, how do I love both parents? And the other parent can't figure that out. They're going to collapse the child into sides. You're the one that's going to have to figure that out. How does the child love both mom and dad? Because you're the healthier parent, and the child knows you can figure this out. So they're giving you all these flamboyant symptoms and all this stuff, all this pathology, knowing that you're going to be able to figure it out. And look, you are, and you will. It would be really helpful if you get the professional support around you to help with that. Yeah, trying to do it on your own is a little difficult. But stay grounded in your reality. Don't believe the lies. That's a critical issue, because the moment you start believing the lies, you become like the colluding participants who are acting as if those are true, as if there is a danger. You don't need to defend yourself. You do not need to defend yourself, and that's the one of the major lies, that you need to prove reality or need to prove you're a good parent. No, you are a good parent. So stay anchored there, and don't fight about it. Just know you're a good parent, and we got another pathological parent who's creating a cross-generational coalition, emotional cutoff, psychological control. It's a delusional disorder. It's a persecutory delusion. It's a thought disorder because mom, dad is kind of unstable, and so it's all a false or a factitious attachment pathology being created. And so you're switching it around and going on attack. But it's not attack. It's not angry attack. Now stay out of there. It's just explaining what reality is to everybody. And that's where I've come along, and provided you with the support you need of giving you the professional level knowledge that you can just sit in that. But you got to get away from parental alienation. You got to get away from this nonsense stuff. Come back to established knowledge. Stay there. Cross generational coalition. Family systems is a great way to explain it. To close here, what's happening for the child is a misattribution of feeling. The breach in the divorce creates two emotions: anxiety because it's a new situation. Oh my goodness, what's going to happen? And sadness because there's a breach in the attachment bond. No matter what happens, a lost family and everything, you're going to feel sad. So there's natural anxiety and there's natural sadness. What should happen from normal, healthy therapist involvement is we just help the child understand those are natural things. We reduce the anxiety by taking a nice, calm, we got this, kid. Everything's going to be okay. It's not, we're just going from, intact family to now a separated family, but we're still a family, and it's just, everything's going to transition just fine. So we reduce the anxiety, and then the sadness is, you feel sad. Oh my goodness, what do you do about that? Oh, get affection. You get some hugs and you increase the affection that displays in the family. That would happen in normal range families. But we got a pathological parent who's just jamming in anxiety in here. And so they're creating this child's anxiety. Oh my gosh, this is a terrible thing. That's that narcissist borderline anxiety about being rejected or abandoned. It's the parent's anxiety that, oh, this is a terrible thing. This is traumatic for me. Oh, it's traumatic for the child. It's that fusion of states. And so I got one parent who's producing anxiety in here, but we got to bring that anxiety down. But Anxiety is is a signal that there's a predator in the world. When a parent's signaling anxiety and the parent's saying it's the other parent who's the predator, so child says, "I don't want to go to the predator. I'm going to be with the protective parent." And so there's a whole false reality that's being created around the child, a false narrative. And all that parent needs to do, the pathological parent, is get the child to believe they're being victimized somehow, and then all automatically the other roles or parental roles are defined. So they just want the child to believe they're a victim. Oh my goodness, you're a victim. That's why you don't challenge the child. You bring empathy to the child. Oh my goodness, you feel like you're a victim. Tell me more about that. Tell me more about how can we solve that? How can we feel? How can we? And you bring empathy as the way of correcting the child, helping the child rediscover their authenticity. And the way they discover their authenticity is because they see it reflected in you. You see them as the authentic child that they are, the authentic person that they are, and they will then see themselves reflected in you. If they are not this crazy, mean, hostile, afraid, terrified thing, no, that's not who they authentically are. That's the other parent's false creation of them. And if you respond to them as if this false creation was true, that kind of hurts their feelings. What do you mean? You think I could be this kind of human like this? Especially in the adolescence when they're being all nasty and stuff. Really? You think this is who I am? Because you're responding as if this is who I am, as if this is reality. And you're trying to defend against it and do all this stuff. Don't believe it. Okay, so don't believe the lies. And the biggest lie is that that child doesn't love you. Oh my goodness, is that a lie? Heavens, no. So you just stay grounded in that. That's the biggest one of all. And you just stay grounded there and you stay grounded in the authenticity of your love. And the child will see their own authenticity reflected in you and your responses and in your empathy. Your empathy will help recover them. Um, the difficulty becomes if they bond to you, they're going to face retaliation from the other parent. So they're really caught in the middle. They're in a hostage situation. So you have to recognize that. And we need to first protect the child. This is child psychological abuse. No treatment is going to be effective as long as for child abuse is going to be effective as long as I'm sending the kid home to be beaten with electrical cords or sexually abused by the stepdad. No therapy is going to work as if I'm sending the kid home to be abused. So the first thing for all abuse diagnoses is you protect the child. So we need to know this is one way or the other. Diagnosis guides treatment. And so this whole feature of this being a custody conflict is a lie. No, custody is easy peasy. Driving it into the courts is a symptom of the narcissistic borderline dark personality of trying to manipulate the courts and everything by creating false pathology in the child. The custody conflict is a symptom. Okay. And the issue is actually pathology, the child's attachment pathology. It should be over in the healthcare system getting treatment. And treatment depends on the diagnosis. Treatment for cancer is different than the treatment for diabetes. Treatment for an abusive targeted parent is different than the treatment for a psychologically abusive light parent. So we kind of need to know what the diagnosis is. And that's important for the mental health people because when I come into a situation, when as a therapist, and I've got two realities that are this divergent, and there's no middle ground that we got abuse one way or the other, I'm going to come in and get on a reality. I'm not going to play the middle because that communicates, that doesn't protect the child, but it also communicates there's the false reality is true. So when I come in or the mental health people come in, we need to get an accurate diagnosis about what reality is and then communicate that to the child in no uncertain terms. Your parents fine. There's no worries. They're not malevolently treating you in some way. Or, holy cow, I totally see it, and we need to protect you from that predatory parent. It's got to go one way or the other. And then we validate the reality that is real and invalidate the reality that's not real. but that means we need an accurate diagnosis 100% of the time. So let's do that. So that's the job, that's the requirements. Let's do that. Recommend a pilot program for the. I recommend you just listen to me. Okay, 3 diagnostic indicators, 12 associated clinical signs, parenting practices rating scale. Boom, you'll get it diagnosed 100% of the time. But if you don't believe me, you want to fight about me, get a pilot program for the family courts, develop the diagnostic assessment and treatment protocols, and do it. But we need to get an accurate diagnosis to guide the treatment plan for the child. In the meantime, let me just close off by saying, don't believe the lies. That's fundamental. Don't trigger into your anxiety. The biggest lie of all is that child doesn't love you. Heavens, no. Uh, again, Dorsey, that's an unbreakable bond. Don't worry about that one. You just stay anchored in your reality. Stay anchored in your love for your child, and stay calm. Um, don't let the pathology consume you. It tries moves from crisis to crisis. Don't let it consume you. Get a plan, establish a plan, work to the plan. And so in 6 months, the pathological parent is just showing up, but you're already there. So with that, I'm going to get off to my Sunday, and we will talk with you next week. Take care, everybody. Bye bye.